A 70-year-old man stands in the dark hallway of his son's house, holding his breath while he listens intently. Sounds drift from the kitchen, and a voice says clearly, "Arthur's house is worth $950,000 with a total of $1,200,000. And with 6 years left on average, we'll sell the house and split the money." This man is me, Arthur Campbell, and those sitting in the kitchen are my son David, his wife Rebecca, his mother-in-law Patricia, and his brother-in-law Marcus. And what they're talking about is my money, my house, and my death. Thanksgiving night, 2018, November 22nd. This is my story, a story of family betrayal, shock, anger, and revenge. If you're old, if you have children, if you have money, then this story is for you, because I'm going to show you how to protect yourself, how to get what's rightfully yours, and how to never be a victim. Let's begin from the very beginning, from that terrible night. Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Sometimes one night changes everything. A conversation, a few words, a betrayal that alters your entire world. My name is Arthur Campbell, and I'm 70 years old, living in Boston. Or more precisely, I'm at my son's house for Thanksgiving on November 22nd, 2018, which is a Thursday. This is America's most sacred family day, with turkey and mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie, a celebration of family and abundance and gratitude. But that night, nothing was sacred at all. I was sitting at the big table with 6 people. Me, my son David, who was 42 years old, my daughter-in-law Rebecca, who was 38 years old, Rebecca's mother Patricia, who was 65 years old, Rebecca's brother Marcus, who was 35 years old, and the empty chair, Eleanor's chair, my wife's chair. Eleanor died 5 years ago in 2013 from Alzheimer's, a terrible disease that took her slowly, first stealing her memory, then making her unable to recognize me, then making her unable to recognize herself. And the last year, she spent in the hospital where I visited her every day and held her hand every day. But she wasn't Eleanor anymore. When she died, part of me was relieved because she wasn't suffering anymore. But part of me died too after 50 years of marriage, 50 years together, and then suddenly being alone. David was my only son, my only child, because Eleanor and I only wanted one child. Quality, not quantity, Eleanor used to say. And David was a good kid who was smart and hardworking, a Harvard Business School graduate who now worked as a consultant at McKinsey & Company with a good salary and a good life. He married Rebecca in 2011, and she was a beautiful woman with blonde hair and blue eyes who worked as a lawyer. But she was cold, always cold, with a fake smile and calculated words. And her family, Rebecca's family, was even colder than she was. Patricia, my mother-in-law, was 65 years old, but didn't look it thanks to Botox and cosmetic surgery and expensive clothes and expensive jewelry. And her husband had died 10 years ago, leaving money that ran out fast. So now she was dependent on Rebecca. But she never showed it because she always looked down on people and always gave orders. Marcus, my brother-in-law, was 35 years old and unemployed. Not technically, because he called himself an entrepreneur, but really he spent his time gambling on poker and sports betting, always in debt and always asking someone for money. This was the group at my Thanksgiving table on November 22nd, 2018. We ate turkey that Patricia carved and served as if it were her own home, asking Arthur, white meat or red meat? And when I said, white, please, she responded, here you go, a small piece because the elderly don't eat much anyway. The elderly, the word was said in such a way that it felt like an insult, as if I was worthless and past my expiration date and ready for the trash. We ate and talked, but it was superficial conversation about the weather and work and politics. Nothing deep and nothing real. At 10 o'clock, the table was cleared, and we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, while the conversation continued. Then Patricia looked at me with that sharp, appraising look and said, "Arthur, old people go to bed early, don't they? You look tired." Her voice was firm and clear and commanding, and I wasn't tired at all. But the message was crystal clear. "Go upstairs. We don't want you here. We'll talk amongst ourselves." I looked at David, my son, waiting for him to say something like, "Mom." "Patricia, Dad isn't tired. He can stay." But David was silent, bowing his head and looking at his coffee. "Yes, I am a little tired. Good night," I said slowly. "Good night, Arthur," Patricia said without a smile, coldly. "Good night, Dad," David said without looking me in the eye. I got up and walked to the stairs slowly like an old man because that's how I felt. And I went up to the guest room on the second floor, a small room with a single bed and simple furniture. I closed the door and sat down on the bed with my hands shaking, though I didn't know why. Nerves, shame, or anger? "Old people go to bed early." The words spun around in my head again and again and again. I'm 70 years old. Yes, I'm old. Yes, but I'm not tired and I'm not sick. My mind works and my body works. I walk every morning and read every day and live life to the fullest. But Patricia saw me as old and tired with go-to-bed-early expectations, and she kicked me out, plain and simple, from my own son's house. And David didn't say a word in my defense. I lay down but couldn't sleep because how could I sleep after that? I stared at the dark ceiling and thought about what Eleanor would say if she were here. "Arthur," she would say, "Patricia is very rude, so talk to David tomorrow and tell him, 'Son, control your wife because I am a guest in your house, not her mother's house.'" Yes, Eleanor would say that because she was a strong woman who spoke the truth and didn't stay silent in the face of injustice. But Eleanor wasn't there, and I was alone. Time passed to 11 o'clock, and I still couldn't sleep. And then a sound came from downstairs. Laughter and giggles and loud voices. What was going on down there? I got up slowly and opened the door to listen, and the sounds were coming from the kitchen, clear and loud and joyful. I was curious about why they were so cheerful and what they were talking about, so I walked into the hallway quietly and slowly, with the careful steps of an old man. I reached the stairs and went down step by step carefully so they wouldn't creak, and downstairs it was dark with only light coming from the kitchen. The kitchen door was ajar by a few centimeters, but it was enough, so I approached and leaned against the wall in the dark shadows, and I looked through the crack in the door to see 4 people sitting at the kitchen table: David, Rebecca, Patricia, and Marcus. Wine bottles sat on the table half empty beside full glasses, and there were documents and papers and files spread out. Patricia was talking seriously, like this was a business conversation, saying, "David, how old is your father?" 70. My heart stopped instantly. David answered, "Yes, 70. His birthday was in September." Patricia nodded and said, "The average male life expectancy is 76, which means he has 6 years left, maybe less. How is his health?" "Good," David said. "Regular doctor checkups with no serious illnesses." "Good," Patricia said, but it felt strange that she said good, as if she actually meant bad. Rebecca interrupted by saying, "Mom, this is so cold because you're talking about Arthur's death." Patricia turned to her daughter with a stern look and said, "It's not cold, Rebecca. It's realistic. Arthur is 70, and statistics are statistics, 6 years on average, and we need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" Rebecca asked. "Yes, financially prepared with will preparation and estate planning," Patricia explained. I stopped breathing while leaning against the wall with my heart pounding fast, very fast. They were talking about my death, about 6 years and averages and statistics, as if I were an object, a number, something coming to an end. Marcus spoke for the first time, asking, "How much money does he have?" with a voice that was greedy, clearly greedy. David paused and drank some wine before answering. "As far as I know, the house in Massachusetts is worth $950,000 because the real estate agent appraised it last year." Marcus whistled and said, "$950,000. And," David continued, "he gets $4,800 a month from his retirement fund, and his total savings should be around $1,000. $1,200,000. Silence fell as everyone went quiet. Then Patricia spoke slowly and carefully, saying, $1,200,000. And you're the only child, David. So that money is yours." David nodded, but hesitantly, saying, "In theory, yes. But my father is very stubborn because he said last month, maybe I'll donate the money to charity." Patricia's face changed to show anger, outright anger, as she said, "What? To charity? We can't allow that. How can we stop him? It's his money and he can use it as he pleases," Rebecca said. Patricia leaned forward with her hands on the table, serious and very serious, saying, "David, do you have power of attorney over your father?" David shook his head and said, "No, I asked for it, but he refused, saying, 'It's not necessary, I'm healthy.'" "That's the problem," Patricia said. "You need to get it, and fast, because if Arthur loses his mental capacity through dementia or a stroke or something else, then you can't do anything without power of attorney." "But my father's mind is perfectly fine," David protested. "It is now," Patricia said. "But Arthur is 70 and old people change quickly. A fall, a minor stroke, and mental capacity can be lost. And then you have to go to court for guardianship, which takes a long time and is expensive and complicated. But if you get it now," Patricia continued, "you'll be prepared for anything because Arthur signs while he's healthy, and then no matter what happens, you're in control." I stood behind the wall in the dark with the words feeling like knives cutting into me. Power of attorney, loss of mental capacity, control. They wanted to control me and control my money. Marcus spoke again, asking, "So when are we selling the house?" David turned to him and said, "Marcus, my father isn't dead yet." "I know," Marcus said, "but we need to plan because a $950,000 house is sitting empty, sitting alone, so we sell it and split the money." Patricia nodded in agreement and said, "David gets half, you get a quarter, and I get a quarter." Rebecca turned to her mother in shock and said, "Mom, why are you getting a share?" "This is David's father's money." Patricia smiled a cold smile and said, "Because I'm the one who made this plan, my dear. I'm the strategist. And if it weren't for me, David would never have thought of power of attorney. And if it weren't for me, you'd still be waiting without any plan. So I get a share too as a consulting fee." When I heard those words, something broke inside me. My hands clenched into fists with my nails digging into my palms. And it hurt. But I didn't care because the pain inside me was much greater. My son was sitting there with his mother-in-law and his brother-in-law and his wife, talking about my death, about 6 years and statistics and selling the house and dividing the money, as if I had already died, as if I were a corpse or property or an object to be turned into money. But I was still there, still alive, still breathing, still able to hear, and hearing this was absolute hell. I backed out quietly and slowly, climbed the stairs, and returned to my room. I closed the door slowly so as not to make a sound, then sat down on the bed with my hands still shaking and my body still trembling. It was 11:30 on November 22nd, 2018, Thursday night, Thanksgiving night. Thanksgiving. What was I supposed to be thankful for? My son who betrayed me? My daughter-in-law who saw me as an object? My mother-in-law who planned to take my money? I sat there in the dark as hours passed, and I thought about every word I had heard again and again. 6 years left. $1,200,000. We'll sell the house. You need to get power of attorney. I'll take a quarter as a consulting fee. The words spun around in my head again and again, never stopping. But there was something else, something more painful. David had been silent and hadn't said much, but he hadn't objected either. He hadn't said, "Mom, this is too cold," or "Patricia, it's disrespectful to talk about my father's death," or "I can't act on this plan." He had just sat there and listened and agreed and participated. My son, my 42-year-old son, the child I held in my arms as a baby, the child I took to school, the young man whose college tuition I paid, the man whose graduation made me cry. Now he was sitting there waiting for my death and waiting for my money. My wife Eleanor. What would Eleanor say about this? I know what she would say, because Eleanor saw this coming. In 2012, a year after David and Rebecca got married, before Eleanor got sick while she was still healthy and still herself, we were sitting one evening at home in our house in Massachusetts, in Salem by the sea, a beautiful house. "Arthur," Eleanor said, "David has changed." "How has he changed?" I asked. "After he married Rebecca, he's different, more calculating and colder, and every visit is about money with questions like, 'Dad, how's your retirement? Are the funds good? Has the house value increased?' Questions that aren't natural, as if he's calculating," she explained. "You're exaggerating," I said. "David is our son and he loves us." Eleanor looked at me with that sad, wise look and said, "Arthur, I hope I'm wrong, but be careful because Rebecca and her family are different people. Money is everything to them, and David is under their influence." "Nonsense," I said. "David is strong and he makes his own decisions." Eleanor shook her head and said, "I hope you're right, honey. I hope you're right." But I wasn't right, and Eleanor was right because she was always right. And now Eleanor was gone, having died in 2013 from Alzheimer's in a horrible, slow death. But maybe it's good that she died, because she didn't see tonight, and didn't see how our son betrayed us. I sat there in the darkness of the night as hours passed until morning came slowly, with the sun rising on November 23rd, 2018. Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. At 7 o'clock, I got up and packed my things. I hadn't brought much, just a small suitcase for 2 days. I went downstairs to the kitchen where everyone was still asleep and hadn't gotten up yet, and I left a note on the counter that said simply, "David, thanks for Thanksgiving. I'm coming back early. Have a good day, Dad." I left and closed the door quietly, got in my car, an old Volvo from 2010, 8 years old but reliable and well-maintained, and I drove from Boston to Salem, Massachusetts, on the North Shore, which took me an hour. I arrived home at my home, Eleanor's home, our home for 50 years. We bought it in 1968 when Eleanor and I were a young couple. I was 30 and she was 28, newlyweds buying our first home. The house was small back then with 2 bedrooms and a small kitchen. But it was ours, our very first home. Over the years, we renovated it and expanded it and made it beautiful. And now it has 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen and a beautiful garden and a sea view. It's worth $950,000 according to what the real estate agent said last year in 2017. And David knew this. He knew its value and its price, and he was waiting 6 years on average. I went inside to the empty, quiet house where I was alone, and I sat in the living room thinking long and hard. What should I do now? Should I do nothing, call David, confront him by saying, "Son, I heard you last night. I heard everything," explain? No, because David would just lie, saying, "Dad, you misunderstood. We were just talking. We weren't serious." Or he would blame someone else by saying, "Dad, it was Patricia's idea. I didn't want to, but I kept quiet for the sake of family harmony." It would all be lies because the truth was clear. David is waiting for my money, waiting for my death, and working on getting power of attorney. And would I let him do this? No, absolutely not. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Margaret Russo, who had been my lawyer for 20 years, a woman I trusted. Margaret, this is Arthur Campbell, and I need an urgent meeting because I need to change my will and estate plan, I said. Margaret paused before asking, Arthur, is there a problem? A big problem, Margaret. A very big one. Can I be at your office at 9 on Monday morning? I asked. Of course, Arthur. I'll be here at 9 and everything will be ready, she said. Thank you, I replied. I made a second call to a private investigator, an old acquaintance named Alan Price, who was a retired FBI agent now working as a private investigator. Alan, this is Arthur Campbell. Do you remember me? I asked. Of course, Arthur. How are you? He replied. I'm not well, Alan, and I need your help with an investigation, a financial investigation, I explained. Who is it about? He asked. My son David, his wife Rebecca, his mother-in-law Patricia, and his brother-in-law Marcus. I need their debts, their lifestyle, their spending, their financial situation, everything, I said. Alan paused before saying, Arthur, this is family. Are you sure? I'm very sure, Alan, because last night I learned something and I need to verify it, I confirmed. I understand. How much time do you need? He asked. Is 2 weeks enough? I suggested. More than enough. Everything will be ready in 2 weeks, he said. Perfect. I'll pay you. How much? I asked. We'll talk about that later. I'll get started now, he replied. Thanks, Alan, I said. I hung up the phone and sat down, feeling relaxed for the first time because the plan was beginning, the counter plan, the defense plan. David is waiting 6 years for my death, but I won't wait. I'm moving now. Part 2. The investigation. 2 weeks passed and it was December 7th, 2018, a Friday. I had met with Margaret 3 times, and the will was completely changed. The estate plan was completely redone, and the power of attorney was completely changed. The old will was simple with everything going to David. The house, the money, the retirement fund, everything. Because he was my only child, so why would I give it to anyone else? But now everything had changed completely. The new will stated David's share is 5%, just 5%, around $60,000. The remaining 95% would be distributed as follows: 50% to Boston Children's Hospital, 25% to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation in memory of Eleanor, and 20% to the Massachusetts Veterans Fund. Power of attorney was no longer David, but Margaret and my former business partner Howard, acting together, with David nowhere to be found. Medical directive was again Margaret and Howard making decisions, with David having no say, none whatsoever. Margaret had asked, Arthur, are you sure? David is your son. Maybe this is too harsh? No, Margaret, I said firmly. It's not harsh enough, but legally, this is the most I can do. The documents were ready and I signed them. The notary certified them with the date December 5th, 2018, making them official and legal and irrevocable without my permission. That same day, a report arrived from Alan in a thick envelope by mail, and inside were terrible truths. I read it carefully, every single page. David and Rebecca couldn't pay the mortgage on their house in Beacon Hill, a $2 million house with a mortgage of $7,000 a month, and they were 3 months late with the bank sending a warning about foreclosure threat. Why? Because their lifestyle exceeded their income dramatically. David was a consultant with a good salary of $200,000 a year. Rebecca was a lawyer with a good salary of $150,000 a year, for a total of $350,000. But the expenses told a different story. Mortgage $70,000 a year, 2 luxury cars with leasing at $30,000 a year, vacations to Europe and the Caribbean at $20,000 a year, and restaurants and clothes and accessories at $60,000 a year. Total spending was $400,000, which was $50,000 more than their income every single year for 3 years, and debt had piled up with credit card debt at $45,000. They were in a financial crisis, a real crisis. Marcus was worse off as a gambling addict playing poker and sports betting and online casino with debts of $67,000 owed to dangerous people who sent threatening messages saying, "Pay up or else." He had no job, no income, no family, and was dependent on Rebecca, but Rebecca was in her own financial crisis. Patricia was living luxuriously in a rented apartment in Beacon Hill at $3,500 a month, with expensive clothes and expensive restaurants and spa treatments and beauty salons. Her income was a small monthly allowance from her deceased husband of $1,800, which wasn't enough. So Rebecca paid $1,700 every month, $20,000 a year. For 3 years, this had gone on, totaling $60,000 of Rebecca's money, but really David's money because it was a joint account. They were all broke, financially broke, and they were looking for a solution. And the solution was me, my money, my house, $1,200,000. They would wait 6 years, then sell the house and split the money and pay off the debts. But I wouldn't wait 6 years. December 8th, 2018 was a Saturday when I woke up early in the morning at 6 o'clock from habit, because old people wake up early. Patricia was right about that, at least. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen watching the sunrise over Salem Bay, a beautiful view I had watched every morning for 50 years. Eleanor used to sit here in the chair across from me drinking her coffee while we talked and made plans and laughed together. Now the chair was empty, had been empty for 5 years, but it was as if Eleanor was there because I could feel it. I could feel her presence. "What should I do, Eleanor?" I said quietly. "David betrayed me, but he's our son, our only child." The wind blew and the window rattled slightly, as if Eleanor was answering me. "Arthur," she said, "you already know what you have to do. Your heart knows and your mind knows. You just need courage. So be brave for me and for yourself." She was right, because I knew what I had to do. David had to be punished with real punishment, because just changing the will wasn't enough. The will is only revealed after I die, so David will find out, but it will be too late. No, David had to find out now, face to face, and he had to see the consequences. And everyone should find out. Rebecca, Patricia, Marcus, all of them. It was time for confrontation. I picked up the phone and called David for the first time in 2 weeks because we hadn't spoken since Thanksgiving. "Hello?" David's voice sounded sleepy because it was Saturday morning at 8:30. "David, it's your father. Did I wake you?" I asked. "Dad." No, how are you? You haven't called in 2 weeks and I was worried," he said. This was a lie because he wasn't worried. He was just being polite. "I'm fine, David, and I want to have dinner with you and Rebecca, and Patricia and Marcus should come too because I have an important announcement," I said. David paused before asking, "An important announcement? About what?" "I can't say over the phone, it needs to be in person. Is tonight okay?" I asked. "Tonight?" "That's sudden, but I guess it's okay, I'll ask." "Where are we meeting?" he said. "At my house in Salem at 7 o'clock, and I'll prepare dinner," I said. "Dad, don't tire yourself out, we'll bring something, he started to say. "No, David. I'll prepare it because it's my invitation at my house," I insisted. "Okay, Dad. We'll be there at 7 tonight," he agreed. "All of you come. Patricia, Marcus, Rebecca, you, 4 people," I specified. "Okay, Dad. See you then," he said. I hung up the phone. I knew exactly what David was thinking. He was calling Rebecca right now saying, "Dad invited us, important announcement." And Rebecca was calling Patricia, and Patricia was excited thinking, maybe Arthur is giving away the house, or maybe he's giving power of attorney, or maybe he's sick, or maybe he's dying. They were hopeful and excited because they thought the plan was working. No, it would be very different indeed. I spent the day preparing by cooking real food, using Eleanor's recipes, taking out her notebook with handwritten notes titled Eleanor's Kitchen Notebooks on the cover. She had started writing it in the 1970s with every recipe and every note, with Arthur likes this written next to some dishes, and David's favorite written next to others. I chose pot roast with beef and vegetables and potatoes, using Eleanor's special recipe that David loved when he was a child. I cooked it slowly and carefully, and the smells filled the house with Eleanor's aromas, making the house feel alive, making it feel like Eleanor was there. I set the table, the big table in the dining room with a white tablecloth, Eleanor's tablecloth, and porcelain plates and silver forks and crystal glasses, like a special evening. But I prepared something else too. Papers, a file on the edge of the table, not invisible but not drawing attention either, not yet. At 6 o'clock I was ready, so I took a shower and got dressed in a suit, a navy blue suit that was Eleanor's favorite because she would say, "You look very handsome." I looked in the mirror and saw a 70-year-old man with white hair and a wrinkled face, but with a straight posture and a clear gaze and a sharp mind. 6 years left, Patricia had said, based on statistics and averages. But I wasn't average. I was healthy and strong. And maybe I would live another 10 years or 15 years. Maybe I would outlive them all. And that thought made me smile. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see 4 people: David, Rebecca, Patricia, and Marcus. David was smiling with a fake smile, saying, "Dad, I missed you." He hugged me with a cold hug, an obligatory hug. "Me too, son," I replied. Rebecca kissed me on the cheek and said, "Arthur, how are you?" "You look well." It was a lie, but she said it nicely. Patricia held out her hand and we shook hands, a cold hand. "Arthur," she said. "Patricia," I replied. Marcus shook my hand too and said, "Mr. Campbell, thank you for inviting us." "You're welcome, Marcus. Come in and sit down," I said. We went into the living room and they sat down while I went into the kitchen to bring drinks, wine, beer, and water. "Dinner's ready, shall we go?" I announced. We went into the dining room and sat down, me at the head, David on my right, Rebecca on my left, and Patricia and Marcus across from me. Eleanor's place was empty on my right, where she always sat. I served dinner with pot roast and vegetables and potatoes and bread. "Dad, this looks great. Is this Mom's recipe?" David asked. "Yes, Mom's recipe," I confirmed. We ate quietly in an awkward silence because everyone was waiting for the important announcement to discover what it was. Patricia was impatient and said, "Arthur, you mentioned on the phone call an important announcement, and I'm curious." "After dinner," I said calmly. "Let's eat first because there's time to talk." But Patricia couldn't wait and asked, "Arthur, is it about your health? Is there a problem?" I looked at her for a long time and saw hope in her eyes. She hoped I was sick. She was hoping I was dying. "No, Patricia. My health is very good, I said. Her face fell slightly, but I saw it clearly. We finished eating and I cleared the plates and brought dessert, apple pie, Eleanor's dessert. "Coffee? Tea?" I asked. "Coffee," David said. I made coffee and served it, then sat down in my place and looked at the 4 of them. "Now," I said, "it's time for the important announcement." Everyone fell silent and waited with their eyes on me. 2 weeks ago, I said slowly. "Thanksgiving at your house, David, in Boston. It was a lovely evening, so thank you again." David nodded and said, "You're welcome, Dad. You're always welcome." It was around 10 o'clock when Patricia said to me, "Arthur, old people go to bed early, don't they? You look tired." "Do you remember, Patricia?" I asked. Patricia paused and her face changed slightly before she said, "Yes, I remember. I was worried because you looked tired." "I wasn't tired," I said, "but I went upstairs to the guest room and lay down, but I couldn't sleep." David looked at me curiously and asked, "Why couldn't you sleep, Dad?" "Because at 11:30 I heard noises from downstairs, laughter and talking, and I was curious, asking myself, why are they so cheerful?" I explained. "And I went downstairs quietly, down the stairs in the dark," I continued. Patricia's face turned white because she understood immediately. "And the kitchen door was ajar, so I looked inside," I said. 4 people were sitting there. You, all of you, with wine bottles and with documents," I continued. "And you were talking," I said simply. David's hand trembled and the coffee cup trembled with it. "You talked about me," I said clearly. Terrible silence filled the room. Patricia asked, "David, how old is your father?" And David answered, 70. And Patricia said, "The average male life expectancy is 76, so he has 6 years left," I recounted. Rebecca bowed her head and looked at the table. Marcus asked, "How much money does he have?" And David replied, "The house in Massachusetts is worth $950,000, with total savings around $1,200,000, I continued. Marcus's face turned bright red. Patricia said, "That money is yours, David, but you need to get power of attorney quickly. Otherwise, Arthur could give it to charities," I said. And Marcus said, "When are we selling the house?" I added. And Patricia replied, "David gets half, Marcus gets a quarter, I get a quarter as advisory fees," I concluded. I stopped and looked at them. 4 people, 4 traitors. I heard every word while standing in the dark, listening to every plan and every calculation, I said. David tried to speak, saying, "Dad, "Shut up, David, it's not your turn yet," I commanded. Terrible silence filled the room with only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. David's face was white, pale white with his hands shaking. Rebecca had her head down and couldn't look me in the face. Patricia was frozen and unable to move, and Marcus was swallowing again and again. I heard every word, I repeated with my voice calm, surgeon calm, but inside I was burning. I stood in the dark in the doorway and listened to you talking about my death and dividing up my money and selling my house. David finally spoke with his voice trembling, saying, "Dad, please, I can explain. We were just talking. We weren't serious. We'd had wine, and people sometimes say the wrong things, but..." "Wrong." My voice rose for the first time. "Wrong things, David? Is waiting for my death the wrong thing? Is saying 6 years left the wrong thing? Is saying we'll sell the house and split the money the wrong thing?" "Dad," he started. "No." I raised my hand. "Don't talk. Just listen, because now it's my turn to talk." I stood up and went to the edge of the table and took the file, the thick file with papers and documents and evidence. I came back and put it on the table in the middle where everyone could see it. "This," I said, "is the paperwork I prepared over the last 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, after your speech." I opened the file and took out the first document and showed it. "This is a new will dated December 5th, 2018, 3 days ago, notarized, legal, and binding," I announced. David's eyes widened and he asked, "A new will?" "Yes, David, a new will, because the old will left everything to you, the house, the money, the retirement fund, everything. Because you are my only child, my sole heir," I explained. I paused and looked at him for a long time. "But now it's changed," I said. I put the will on the table and said, "Read it, David." Read it aloud so everyone can hear." David's hand trembled as he took the will and read it quietly at first. Then his face changed and paled even more. "Aloud," I commanded. "Let everyone hear." David swallowed and read, "I, Arthur Campbell, of sound mind and body, make this will with the distribution of my assets as follows. 5% to my son David Campbell, about $60,000, and the remaining 95% distributed as 50% to Boston Children's Hospital, 25% to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation, in memory of my late wife, Eleanor Campbell, and 20% to the Massachusetts Veterans Fund." He paused and couldn't continue as the paper slipped from his hand. 5%, I said. 5% of $1,200,000 equals $60,000. That's your share, David. Patricia jumped up and said, "That's ridiculous." "Arthur, have you lost your mind? David is your son, your only child. How can you do this?" I turned to her with a cold look and said, "How do I do it, Patricia?" "Easy. I call the lawyer and say, 'I want to change my will.' The papers are drawn up. I sign them, the notary certifies them, and it's done." "But why?" "Just because of a conversation," she started. "Just a conversation?" My voice rose again. "Did you say just a conversation, Patricia? You were sitting there in the kitchen drinking wine and making plans about my death and my money and my house. This is not just a conversation, Patricia. This is betrayal." Patricia sat back down in silence. I took the second document and said, "This is a power of attorney change where the old power of attorney was David making all financial and medical decisions. Everything. The new power of attorney is Margaret Russo, my lawyer, and Howard Chen, my former business partner, both together making joint decisions. And David is nowhere to be found," I explained. David's voice came out muffled, asking, "Dad, did you revoke my power of attorney?" "Yes, because Patricia was right about that. You needed power of attorney, but not me, because I'm healthy and of sound mind and can make my own decisions," I said. "But if something happens, if I get sick, Margaret and Howard decide, not you, never you," I added. The third document. This is a medical directive covering life support and organ donation and funeral arrangements. Everything is written down with Margaret and Howard executing it, and David has no say. The fourth document was a thick one, and I said slowly, "And this is the private investigator's report." Patricia's face changed instantly, and she asked, "Private investigator?" "Yes, Patricia, Alan Price, a retired FBI agent whom I hired 2 weeks ago." And I said, "Investigate my family, their finances, their debts, their lifestyle, everything," I explained. I opened the report and said, "Here are the findings, interesting findings." "David and Rebecca," I read, "Beacon Hill house worth $2 million with a mortgage of $7,000 a month, 3 months behind, and the bank has sent a foreclosure notice." David looked up and said, "Dad, this is private information." "Private, David. Is your financial situation private?" "But isn't my financial situation private? When you sit there and say, 'My dad has a $950,000 house,' isn't that private?" I challenged. I continued reading. "Annual income is David $200,000 and Rebecca $150,000 for a total of $300,000, $150,000. Annual expenses are mortgage $70,000, car leasing $30,000, vacations $20,000, and restaurants and luxury spending $60,000 for a total of $400,000, I continued. Spending exceeds income by $50,000 every year for 3 years, creating total debt of $150,000 with credit cards at $45,000 in debt, I read. Rebecca started crying quietly, with tears streaming down her face. "Financial crisis," I said, "a real crisis, and you're looking for a solution, and the solution is my money. $1,200,000. I turned the page and said, Marcus, Rebecca's brother, 35 years old, gambling addict. Marcus stood up and said, Mr. Campbell, Sit down, I yelled for the first time. Sit down and listen. Marcus sat down slowly. Poker, sports betting, online casino with debt of $67,000 owed to dangerous people who sent threatening messages saying, pay up, or we'll break your legs, I read. Job, none. Income, none. How does he live? Rebecca's money, more accurately, David's money. $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year for 3 years, totaling $36,000, I continued. Marcus bowed his head in shame, finally feeling ashamed. And Patricia, I said, looking at her. Rebecca's mother, 65 years old, widowed after her husband died in 2008. Inheritance of $300,000 that you spent quickly, didn't you, Patricia, on a luxury lifestyle and expensive vacations and expensive clothes, and in 10 years, $300,000 was gone, I said. Current income is $1,800 a month from her late husband, but lifestyle costs $5,500 a month, with Beacon Hill apartment rent at $3,500 and the rest on spa and restaurants and shopping, I continued. Shortfall of $3,700 monthly paid by Rebecca, annually $44,000 for 3 years totaling $124,000. $132,000, I concluded. Patricia fell silent because there was nothing to say. The facts spoke for themselves. So, I said, closing the file, you're all broke, financially screwed. David and Rebecca have $150,000 in debt. Marcus has $67,000 in debt. And Patricia is completely dependent on Rebecca. And all of you are looking for a solution, an easy solution, a quick solution, I continued. And the solution is me, my death. Wait 6 years, then buy the house, split $1,200,000, pay off the debts, and continue your luxurious life, I said. But you didn't know that I heard everything, and I took precautions, I added. I put all the documents on the table in a pile. These documents, I said, are the end of your dreams. You won't get my money, you won't take my house, and you won't take anything of mine. When I die, whether it's 6 years from now or 10 years or 20 years, 95% of my assets will go to charities, to children, to Alzheimer's research, to veterans, I explained. And you will get $60,000, David. 5%. This is my final gift and my final message. I didn't value you enough and I raised you wrong. But now it's too late, I concluded. David was crying, really crying with tears streaming down his face. And he said hoarsely, Dad, please, I'm really sorry. That night was so wrong, I know. But Patricia pushed me. We'd been drinking wine and I couldn't think. Patricia pushed you. I looked at him sternly and said, David, you're 42 years old. 42. You're not at an age where you say, Patricia pushed me. You're a grown man who graduated from Harvard and works as a McKinsey consultant and makes your own decisions. But Dad, he tried. That night, I interrupted, Patricia asked, do you have power of attorney? And you said, no, I asked for it, but she wouldn't give it to me. Do you remember that, David? David nodded and said, yes, but when did you ask, David? When did you ask me for power of attorney? I challenged. David paused and thought before saying, I don't remember exactly, but because you never asked, I said. Never at all. You lied that night to Patricia by saying, I asked, but my father wouldn't give it to me. But the truth is, you never asked because it wasn't time yet. It wasn't time. But that night, Patricia suggested it by saying, ask, get it quickly. And you thought, yes, good idea. I'll get it because my father is old and I'll be in control, I explained. David shook his head and said, no, Dad, no, I didn't think that, I swear. Don't swear, David. Because false oaths are not forgiven by God, I said. Rebecca spoke for the first time with her voice trembling, saying, Mr. Campbell, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was there that night too, and I listened too, and I should have objected by saying this is wrong, but I didn't because we're in financial trouble and I was afraid and I was weak. I looked at her. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law for 7 years, a beautiful and smart woman, but a cold and calculating woman. Rebecca, I said, thank you for your honesty, for your first honest words, but it's too late because you've been watching me for 7 years, and every visit your eyes were on the house asking, how much is this piece worth? Is this painting original? Is this furniture antique? You always assessed and always calculated. I noticed, Rebecca, because I'm not stupid. I may be old, but I'm not blind, I added. Rebecca was silent with her head down, crying. Marcus spoke with his voice hushed, saying, Mr. Campbell, I'm a gambling addict. I know and I admit it, and I'm in debt, dangerous debt, but I never thought about your money, I swear. That night Patricia spoke saying, a quarter is yours, and I was shocked, wanting to say, no, that's wrong. But the debts came to mind and I thought, a quarter, $300,000 will pay off the debts. And I kept quiet, because I was a coward. Marcus, I said, you are the most honest one because you admitted it and admitted your guilt, and I appreciate that. But I don't forgive you. Because you're a stranger, not family. You're Rebecca's brother, but not my family. Just an opportunist waiting for gambling money. Marcus nodded and said, you're right. You're absolutely right. I turned to Patricia, who sat upright, still arrogant and still proud. Patricia, I said, you're the planner, the one who gives the ideas, the one who said get power of attorney and we'll sell the house and I'll take a quarter as consulting fee. You are this family's downfall and you are poison. You poisoned Rebecca by telling her money is everything and live a life of luxury and use credit cards, you'll pay it off later, I continued. And David was affected through Rebecca as your poison spread to him, I added. Patricia finally spoke with her voice cold, saying, Arthur, you're too emotional and you don't see the facts. The fact is, you're 70 years old. You're old and the statistics are clear. 6 years on average, maybe less. And you live alone in a big house, a $950,000 house for one person, which doesn't make sense. What makes sense is moving to a smaller place, selling the house, using the money and helping the family, she continued. I just thought logically, not emotionally, practically, and if you see that as betrayal, she started. Betrayal, I shouted while slamming my fist on the table so the plates rattled. Betrayal, Patricia, because you didn't talk to me. You didn't say, Arthur, have you thought about moving somewhere smaller? We can help. No, you talked behind my back late at night over wine and made plans without my knowledge and without my permission. Isn't that betrayal? I demanded. Patricia fell silent because she couldn't answer. I was right, absolutely right. I sat down and took a deep breath to calm down slowly. David, I said, I'm going to ask you one question, and you must answer honestly. Just one question. David looked up with his eyes red from crying and said, Ask, Dad. If I hadn't overheard you that night, if I hadn't found out, would you have come to me 2 weeks later today and said, Dad, we talked wrong at Thanksgiving, I'm sorry? I asked. David paused for a long time, thinking, then bowed his head and said quietly, No, I wouldn't have come because I hoped you'd forget. I hoped you hadn't heard, and we'd go on like normal. Thank you, I said. Thank you for your honesty, and that answers my question completely because you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for getting caught. So there's no real remorse, no real apology, just regret for getting caught, I concluded. Dad, no, he protested. Yes, David, yes, definitely yes, I said firmly. I stood up and said, Now my final decision. Listen, all of you, listen very carefully. 1. The will remains unchanged with 5% to David and 95% to charity. Final, I announced. 2. The power of attorney remains unchanged with Margaret and Howard, and David gets nothing. Final, I continued. 3. In this house, this beloved house of mine, this is my last meal with you. I never want to see you here again, any of you, I said. Rebecca screamed, "No! Please! 4. David, you are my son, and I cannot change that because of blood ties. But the father-son relationship is over with no more visits, no more phone calls, no more holidays. None," I stated. 5. Rebecca, you are no longer my daughter-in-law, and you are gone in my eyes, I added. 6. Patricia, you were never family, and you never will be, I said. 7. Marcus, you are a stranger, and you must stay a stranger, I continued. And finally, I said, if you're thinking of suing me, go ahead, because my lawyer is ready. The documents are solid, and there are doctor's reports, showing I'm healthy and of sound mind, so no court can revoke my will. And if I get sick, if I get dementia, if something happens, Margaret and Howard will protect me and you'll never get near me, I concluded. David stood up and walked towards me with his hands held out, saying, "Dad, please, one more chance, just one chance, I'll change, I swear, I'll leave." "Rebecca, I'll get rid of Patricia, just you and me, father and son like before." I looked at him, my son, 42 years old, crying and begging. And for a moment I softened because my heart softened. He was my son, my baby, my child. But then I remembered the words from that night. 6 years left. We'll sell the house. I need to get power of attorney. And I hardened again. "David," I said slowly, "it's too late. Much too late. If you had said that night, 'Mom, Patricia, this is wrong. We can't talk about Dad like this.' And if you had defended me, maybe I would have forgiven you. But you were silent. You agreed. You participated," I said. "And that is unforgivable," I concluded. David fell to his knees, literally collapsed to the floor, saying, "Dad, no. Please. I'm your son, your only child. Don't cut me out of your life. Please." My eyes filled with tears, but I pushed them back and controlled myself. "Get up, David. Stand up and stand up like a man," I commanded. David stood up slowly, staggering. "Now," I said, "get out of my house, all of you, and don't ever come back." Rebecca was crying, Patricia was angry, Marcus was ashamed, and David was devastated, completely devastated. They walked to the door slowly, like a defeated army. David turned at the door one last time and said, "Dad, I love you. I always have. I always will." I looked at him for a long time and said, "I love you too, David. I always have. But love isn't enough. You need trust and you need respect, and those are gone now." "Goodbye, son," I said. "Goodbye, Father," he replied. They left and the door closed in silence. I sat down at the dining table alone with leftover food on the plates and cold coffee in the cups and tear stains on the napkins. And I sat there for a long time. I cried, finally cried, because I had lost my son. But at the same time, I had gained my honor and my freedom. Epilogue. 6 years later. 6 months passed, and it was June 2019. David had called 59 times with every call saying, "Dad, please let's talk." I didn't answer any of them and didn't respond to any of them. Letters came, long letters saying, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I broke up with Rebecca. I cut Patricia out of my life. I'm in therapy, I'm changing. Please give me another chance." I read the letters but didn't reply because I wasn't ready yet, and maybe I never would be. Life had changed completely. I thought about moving away from Salem, from Massachusetts, but I decided no. This is my home, Eleanor's home. my home of 50 years. So why would I leave because of David? I won't leave, I'll stay. But I wasn't alone because I found a community. I signed up for the Salem Senior Center with daily activities including yoga and painting and music and book club. I made real friends. George, who was 73 and widowed and a retired teacher, Barbara, who was 72 and widowed and a retired nurse, and William, who was 75 and widowed and a retired engineer. They were all in similar situations with relationships with their children that were complicated, either distant or estranged, either because of money or because of betrayal. And we understood each other and supported each other as a family that isn't a family. We had dinner every week at someone's house, taking turns, where we cooked and talked and laughed and shared memories. For the first time in 6 months, for the first time since Eleanor, I didn't feel alone. I started volunteering at Boston Children's Hospital 2 days a week, visiting sick children, reading stories, and playing games. Small things, but meaningful things. Because these children would get 50% of my estate, and Eleanor's and my money would go to them for their treatments, and their medications, and their hopes. And I could see that now, vividly. David won't get it, but these children will, and that's good. Very good. I made a donation to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation in memory of Eleanor, $10,000 for research and treatment in the future. Because Eleanor died of Alzheimer's, a terrible death, but maybe in the future others won't die because a cure will be found, and Eleanor's money will help this cure. I went to the Massachusetts Veterans Fund and visited old soldiers and veterans who were wounded and sick and lonely. I sat with them and talked and listened to their war stories and stories of sacrifice. And I knew the money would go to the right place, not to David, but to these heroes. December 2019 arrived, and a year had passed since that confrontation. The doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon when I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to see David standing there. I was shocked and couldn't move because I hadn't seen him in a year. He had called 105 times and written 13 letters, and I hadn't answered any of them. And now he was at my door. He had changed dramatically by losing weight with his hair turning white, his face tired, and his eyes sad. "Dad," he said quietly. "Hello?" "David?" I replied. "Can we talk for 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes?" he asked. What should I do? Should I close the door and say, "No, go away"? But I was curious about what he would say a year later. "Come in," I said. He came in and looked around, saying, "The house is the same, it hasn't changed at all." "Sit down," I said. We sat down in the living room facing each other in awkward silence. "Dad," David said, "I left Rebecca last year in March 2019, and we divorced with everything finalized in June." I was shocked and asked, "Why did you leave her?" "Because you were right. Rebecca and her family were toxic, and money was everything to them. And I was affected, and I was blind," he explained. "But then that night at your house, that confrontation, I saw myself and looked in the mirror and saw who I was and what I was," he continued. "I wasn't happy at all," he added. "So I left, telling Patricia I wouldn't see her again, cutting her out of my life," he said. "And I went to therapy once a week with a psychologist, and I talked and told everything about my childhood and my marriage and you and Mom and everything," he explained. "And I learned that I was seeking approval, Rebecca's approval and Patricia's approval, but I never sought yours. Never," he admitted. I listened silently in astonishment. "Dad," David continued, "I'm so sorry, I'm really sorry, that Thanksgiving night was so wrong, terribly wrong. And I'm not expecting your forgiveness because I know it's unforgivable. But I wanted to say I've changed. I've really changed," he said. "I changed jobs and left McKinsey because there it's all about money and status, and I got tired of it," he explained. "Now I work for a nonprofit, the Education Foundation, an education fund for poor kids with much less salary, but it's meaningful. And for the first time in years, I'm doing meaningful work, he said. And I moved into a small apartment, not Beacon Hill, but Somerville, small and simple. But it's enough. And for the first time, I'm debt-free and clean, he added. I looked at him, my son, my changed son. David, I said slowly, are you happy? Are you truly happy? Yes, Dad. For the first time in years, I'm truly happy, he replied. My eyes filled with tears and I said, good, very good. Dad, one more thing. I don't want you to change your will because Boston Children's Hospital and the Alzheimer's Foundation and the Veterans Fund are the right places, and Mom would be happy, he said. I just want you in my life, even if it's just a little with a phone call once a month or a visit every 3 months. Small things, but something, he explained. I paused and thought long and hard. Should I forgive him and give him a chance? There were 2 voices inside me. One voice said, yes, forgive him because he's your son, and what would Eleanor say? She would forgive. While the other voice said, no, it's too soon, a year isn't enough, wait longer and see more. David, I said finally, I'm not ready yet to fully forgive because the pain is still there and the hurt is still there. But I see it. You've changed. You've really changed. And that's good. Very good, I acknowledged. So here's my proposal. Slowly, step by step, 1 phone call a month for 5 minutes. No more, I offered. 6 months from now, in June 2020, we'll talk again, and we'll see. Maybe a visit, maybe more, I don't know. Time will tell, I added. David smiled for the first time in a year, really smiled, and said, thank you, Dad. Thank you so much. I'll wait as long as it takes. He stood up and said, I should go now because I've kept you long enough. Wait, I said. I went to the kitchen and got something, then came back. It was Eleanor's recipe book, and I said, here, it's yours. Your mother's handwriting, your mother's recipes. Keep it and keep it safe. David took it and looked at it with his eyes filling with tears, asking, Dad, this is very precious. Are you sure? I'm sure because you are Eleanor's son, my son, and maybe someday you'll cook something from your mother's recipe, and you'll remember her and remember us, I said. David cried and hugged me for the first time in a year. A real hug, a warm hug. I love you, Dad, he said. I love you too, son, I replied. He left and the door closed. I sat there for a long time. I looked at Eleanor's photo and asked, did I do the right thing, sweetheart, to start forgiving? The wind blew as if Eleanor was answering, yes, Arthur, you did the right thing because life is too short for anger and too short for resentment. And David has changed, truly changed, and you saw him, so slowly open your heart, slowly. Today is November 2024, and 6 years have passed since that Thanksgiving in November 2018, that terrible night. Patricia said 6 years left, based on the average male life expectancy is 76. But today I am 76, exactly 76 in November 2024. And I'm alive, still alive, healthy and strong and happy. Average statistics are sometimes wrong. My relationship with David improved slowly, step by step. In 2020, there were 6 months of phone calls, then the first visit in June 2020, a short visit of 2 hours, but it was nice. In 2021, there were more frequent visits, once a month and sometimes more often. In 2022, we spent holidays together, including Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays. But the will hasn't changed, still 5% to David and 95% to charities. Because the relationship has improved, but the past hasn't changed. And that Thanksgiving night was never forgotten. Forgiven, but not forgotten. And David understood, saying, Dad, the will is right, because I don't deserve more. I did terrible things, and you're so generous because even 5% is too much. Rebecca, I haven't seen Rebecca at all in 6 years. And Patricia, I haven't heard from Patricia. And Marcus, I don't know what happened to Marcus. But David is in my life in a small place, but a place nonetheless. And I'm happy, for the first time in 6 years, truly happy. I have my community with senior center friends, including George and Barbara and William and others. I have volunteer work at Children's Hospital every week with kids and smiles. I have my donations to Alzheimer's Foundation and Veterans Fund, meaningful donations. And I have my home, the Salem house, Eleanor's house with the ocean view and memories. This morning I went for a walk seaside at sunrise, and I thought about that Thanksgiving night in 2018, November 22nd. That night changed everything as the breaking point and the turning point. But do I regret it? No, not at all. Should I not have confronted him? No, I absolutely should have confronted him. Should I not have changed the will? No, I absolutely should have. Because that night I learned that family isn't always right. That family sometimes betrays you, and that family sometimes becomes your enemy. And you have to protect yourself and stand up for yourself and protect your honor. Just because you're old doesn't mean you're weak or stupid or a victim. You are strong and of sound mind and right. I am sending this message to all the elderly, to all parents, to all people. 1. Protect yourself legally with a will and power of attorney given to the right people, people you trust. 2. Don't keep it secret. Tell your family, my will is this, my power of attorney is this, by being open and honest. 3. If there is betrayal, confront it, and don't hide it by saying, I know, I heard, I saw, showing proof and being clear. 4. Punish with fair punishment, because betrayal must have a price. 5. Consider forgiveness, but not right away, because it takes time, maybe months or maybe years, but consider it. 6. Find a new community with new friends and new activities, because life isn't just one relationship. 7. Live meaningfully through volunteering and charity and helping others, not for yourself, but for others. 8. And remember that statistics are wrong when they say 6 years left, because you'll live 10 years or 15 years or 20 years because you are strong. David is coming tonight for dinner at my place. I'm preparing dinner using Eleanor's recipe for pot roast, David's favorite. I'm setting the table with a white tablecloth for 2 people, me and David, father and son. Eleanor's photo is on the table watching us and smiling. The door will ring and David will come, and we'll hug and sit down and eat and talk. A normal family, but a family with a past, a family with pain, but a family moving forward. Not perfect, but real. And I'm happy at 76 years old, having outlived the average life expectancy, but I'm still here and strong and still here. Patricia was wrong when she said 6 years, but I've been here 6 years and more years will come. Because I fought for my rights and I won, and now I'm living fully and meaningfully. This is my story. Arthur Campbell, 76 years old, retired, widowed, but still alive and fighting and winning. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Click on the box on the left to listen to the next story.